Freedom Knows No Color, Chapter 4. Slaves knew that if they ran away, they would be hunted down. They knew the odds of making it to freedom were against them. In a place where all black people were slaves, all white people noticed a black runaway. Unless he had a pass from his master, he had to be a fugitive. Therefore, it was imperative that slaves on the run not be seen. Darkness was the only friend they had. Daniel and Julian headed for the river through the woods that ran alongside it. The moon was tangled in dark clouds, and there was nothing left of it but an eerie glow. Julian led the way with old Jeb's dying words leading him on like a beacon. Follow the river. Don't ever lose sight of the river. When Julian was about 9, Ed Whitney had taught him how to find directions. He pointed out the family of stars shaped like a dipper. See yonder? Ed Whitney said, pointing up to the dark sky. Those 2 stars in the bowl of the dipper. Those are pointers, telling you where the North Star is. See it up there, straight off the handle of the dipper? If you face the North Star, you're headed north, and south is behind you. Julian had been excited by this new information. Almost every night afterward, he'd look for the Big Dipper constellation, and then the North Star. Now the boys hurried into the stand of live oak trees draped with Spanish moss. The boys carried cornmeal cakes, bacon, and their water gourds. Julian had managed to snatch a pocket knife as well from the gin house. He thought it would come in handy for cutting up game or gutting the fish they caught. Neither Julian nor Daniel had ever lived in the wild before, but they had spent their days hunting and fishing with Ed Whitney. Both knew how to build a fire and stalk small game. "How long you figure it'll take to walk to New Orleans?" Daniel asked. Like Julian, Daniel had never been in New Orleans. Thomas had told them a lot about it, though. All of his stories were exciting. He told about a great port filled with ships coming and going. Some brought sugar from the West Indies and wine from France. Others carried coffee and rosewood and mahogany from Central America. All those places were strange to Julian, almost unbelievable, like distant lands and fairy tales. But most exciting of all were the stories Thomas told about free people with black skin. They simply walked on the streets of New Orleans, like white people. There were black slaves in New Orleans, of course, but they looked no different from the free blacks who came and went as they wanted. So a fugitive slave could easily get lost in the crowd. "It'll take us maybe 15 nights to get to New Orleans," Julian told Daniel. "If we're lucky, and nothing bad happens, that is." Then Julian told Daniel what Uncle Jeb had told him about the crazy white man who would help him. "But what if he's not there?" Daniel worried. "Or what if there's no house with a rooster on the roof? Then what?" "Then we'll find our way ourselves," Julian said with a bravado that he really didn't feel. Old Jeb could have remembered it wrong, Daniel pointed out. He could have remembered it right, too, Daniel said. "Oh," Julian said. "I can't believe there's a white man who wants to help slaves escape anyway," Daniel muttered. "I guess I'll have to see it to believe it." He was quiet then, and Julian was glad. He was no more sure of the validity of Jeb's directions than Daniel was, but dwelling on it didn't help matters. They just had to do it. The boys moved on, making good time. But about an hour later, the sounds of yelping dogs filled the night. "Oh no!" Daniel cried, growing weak with terror. "They missed us back at the plantation, and now the slave catchers are coming with bloodhounds. They'll run us down and take us back to the plantation. They'll flay us alive." Julian felt the cold hand of terror grip him too, but he tried not to show it. "It's not likely they'll miss us until dawn," he said. "Could be those dogs are out for some other reason. Might be men hunting possum." "No, it's the patrollers," Daniel groaned. "Keep moving," Julian said. "We have to reach the river. If the dogs get too close, we'll jump in. Going in the water cuts off the scent." The boys scrambled through the bush, reaching the bank of the river that meandered south. The yelping of the dogs grew closer. "What if it's Cannon himself leading the pack?" Daniel said in a trembling voice. "Oh, Julian, he almost killed me just for breaking that cotton branch. What's he going to do to us when he finds us?" "Come on," Julian insisted. "We're almost at the riverbank now." The boys scrambled down the ravine and huddled near the water, their ears cocked to the cries of the dogs. Julian could imagine the terrible beasts' maddened eyes with their huge heads and jaws dripping saliva. They wouldn't quit until they found where their scent led. What if they just set dogs on them, Julian wondered. What did it feel like to be bitten by a dog? There was a deep silence as the boys waited. A mosquito buzzed near Julian's ear. Then it landed on his neck and bit hard, but he didn't move to slap it. He didn't want to make a sound. Finally, Daniel whispered, "The sound's moving off, don't you think?" "I think so," Julian said. "Maybe it was just some farm dogs chasing a raccoon or something." "You think so, Julian?" Daniel asked. "I do," Julian said. "Listen, Daniel, we have to be brave. We can't be jumping over every little thing we hear, or else we'll die of fear before we get to New Orleans. I remember my mama telling me that you can make it through anything if you just put your mind to it, and that's what I plan to do. We've come too far to get caught by our own fears." "I'm scared of dogs, and I'm scared of patrollers, Julian," Daniel admitted. "Patrollers are stupid white men, mostly poor," Julian said. "Old Jeb used to laugh about them. They can't get regular jobs that call for a little sense, so they chase down fugitive slaves. But you can trick 'em if you're smart. Old Jeb said they like to drink corn liquor, and half the time they can't tell a runaway slave from a gum tree." He listened again. All was quiet. "Come on, let's go," he said. They moved on then, following the river south. "I don't remember my mama," Daniel said suddenly. "I remember mine," Julian said. "She was real pretty, and smelled like violets. She sang sweet, too. She would hold me on her lap and sing to me. And she was so soft and nice. Everybody liked her, even Ed Whitney." "Master Ed was a good man," Daniel said. "He was," Julian replied, memories of the Whitney farm flowing across his mind as sweetly as the wind over clover. "I remember sometimes for no reason he would bring us all peach tarts, and he would roast a pig or a turkey, and we'd have ourselves a feast." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I remember that too. You know, he liked you best of all the boys. Anybody could see that." Julian nodded, comforted by the sound of frogs in the night. He had heard once that frogs stopped chirping when something was wrong. But then how would frogs know the difference between Julian and Daniel tromping through and the patrollers? He wondered. "I sure do wish that old Missus had let me say goodbye to Master Ed," Julian said. "I'd have liked to tell him how I felt." "That old woman's going to burn to a crisp in hell," Daniel said. "She sold us north to Mr. Canyon out of pure meanness." "That's the truth," Julian agreed. The terrain of land was uneven now. There were hills to climb and little valleys to slosh through that slowed them down. Julian worried that dawn would come before they found the house with the rooster weather vane. Then they'd have to hide out for the day before moving on. He knew the longer they stayed on the run, the better chance they had of getting caught. If that crazy man could really help them, they needed to reach him soon.